So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzaielic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yirmiyahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yirmiyahu the prophet, we understand the 61st chapter, being the very section related with the spring feast found in Leviticus the 23rd chapter, and also the autumn feast found in the same chapter. Then we read sections related with Daniel, the 11th chapter, and establish a very clear path of what we should expect from the very near future. There is a report very recently that U.S.-led campaign in Syria has destroyed silos of grain, and civilians were destroyed for no reason. So then, there are many countries concerned with these new war fronts, and let's be very clear, U.S. is doing this because the economy of the country is not doing the way it should, and then they decided to find some sort of excuse so then they can get their arms industry then back on track, as U.S. for many years, because of the weak industry and lack of entrepreneurship, has lost then the ability of production. So then mostly they push for wars and more wars and more wars. Because of these, obviously and unfortunately, Great Britain was then involved in these scoundrels fronts of war, and then obviously Mr. Cameron is having his own position at jeopardy on next year's election. But there is a point though, since he said that these wars are going to last for many years, he is jeopardizing his own position by making this statement. It is true, sometimes during the times of excitement and new ideas of trying then to place behind skirmishes, they set themselves with the war plans and they want to last forever. End quote. This time the world is much more aware of the plans of the U.S., and they are not very concerned with what's going on in the Middle East. They were then behind the scenes for so long, and because of a few deaths of a few journalists and some aid workers and some tourists, then they decide to use these as an excuse to go to war to get the economy going once again. Simply it won't work. However, Mr. Cameron can at least try to salvage his own campaign by placing a timeline of these war fronts, or the presence of the Britons regarding these war fronts. It has to be very specific, because the economy of Great Britain is not doing so nicely as they were thinking of, and involving themselves with a war is going to drag down the economy even further. As long as he places a time regarding these air bombardments, then he has a chance of having a plan B, rather than joining with the Yanks and then having a forever type of war and draining the entire system. And the problem is the USD has some sort of spikes only because of these war fronts. But have in mind, civilians are being destroyed for no reason. So then, as far as we can understand, the Holy Instructions gives us very important understandings related with the events of the time of the end. As it was explained yesterday and the day before, it is imperative for the Soviet Union return to its former position. However, Mr. Putin is truly afraid. he's very concerned with the outcome of these new war fronts, and he's kind of sensing himself placed aside. He wants to become part of these new war fronts, and he should never do it. The main understanding is civilians are being destroyed. Understandably, it's important to have some sort of control over the area and so on and so forth, but the US has done the way they always did. They try to go forward thinking they can scare away the enemy, as they did during the time of the Vietnam War. And it was a huge blunt, and at this time, then the Islamic world has promised they will inflict injuries in America, and their words should not be taken lightly. But then, what do we understand as far as the movements of these events? Firstly, it's very important for the Soviet Union maintaining the rhythm of their own works with China, maintaining relationship. China is going through some also troubles, and there are places in Hong Kong, for instance, the students are trying to make changes in the system. It obviously won't work. The second is, then in the Arctic, oil deposits were found. So then the Soviet Union is doing nicely. However, the desire of Mr. Putin of becoming part of these US-led strikes is absolutely wrong. He should stay out of it as much as he can. However, he can send humanitarian help to those who are then obviously there, mostly the civilians, where then the civilians are being protected in certain areas of those countries, and provided them with provisions. And being very specific how long this war would take. Because as long as